welcome back. My name is Brittany, and today I wanted to share some tips to help you get out of a reading slump. I am still in one. I have not started the year off strong in terms of reading goals as I would have hoped to have. I've only been reading about 3 books a month, where previously I was up to 10 or 12, so I have definitely slowed down, and that feeling just sucks. I have some tips today, some things that I've done to help get myself out of a reading slump, and hopefully this will be helpful for you as well if you find yourself in the same boat. I'm not recommending specific books necessarily because, as we're going to talk about today, I think the reason for the slump, what you're looking for, what you're not looking for, I think all of these things are just going to be so personalized, and so I won't be recommending specific books. I'll mention some books that have worked for me at one time or another, and you will see how different they are based on what I was going through. So, take some notes. Hopefully you feel inspired. Hopefully you take something away and can pick up your next great read. Before we dive into my tips and things to think about, I do think you should start with why you're in a slump. Did you read an amazing book and now you're just staring at a wall because nothing else is going to be as good? Did you read something horrible and it just stopped all progress? Or has life or health or other things just gotten you down? I think just looking at that and figuring out kind of why you're not gravitating towards books like you used to is going to be helpful for my first tip, my first question. So, tip number 1 is to ask yourself, what are you looking for and what are you not looking for? I am guilty of this where it's I don't know what to read, as I literally have a wall of books behind me. And I just don't know. But I think truly we do know. And you might not know what you want, but you might know what you don't want to read. So we're going to talk about both of them. In terms of what do you want to read? What are you looking for? This is going to tie back into kind of what's going on in life. I'm going to be alluding to a few situations. I'm not going to go into details, but really since last September, I've had some ups and mostly downs that I've just carried into this year, and that has affected my reading. Last year, I managed to avoid a reading slump, and in that moment, I knew I wanted basically just to not be myself. If that, sounds dramatic, but I just didn't want to deal with what I was dealing with, and I knew I wanted a deep, expansive fantasy. I wanted to learn about these people and, sink into something that would distract me from my own life. And at that moment, I decided the Farseer trilogy was the right choice. I grabbed the audiobooks. They were on Audible Plus at the time. They might still be. And I listened to 90 hours of Fitz's life while I repainted and reorganized my master closet. And in that moment, that was perfect. That was just what I wanted. My most recent reading slump this year, I haven't really had the mental energy to pick up something epic. So I was looking for books that were fun, easy, and fast to read. So I grabbed Romantasy, which typically is kind of like a Lifetime movie. If you're old enough, I don't know if they still have those. I don't know. But basically, it's this really ridiculous story, but at the same time, it's just ridiculous enough. It's entertaining, you can binge it, and then you move on. What did I want in those two situations was very different, but it helped choose what books to grab. Because if I had grabbed an epic fantasy this year, I don't think I would have stuck with it. And I just would have been another book in a stack of things I haven't completed, but then just adds to the sense of slumpiness, because then you're not finishing books. You might want something cozy or something short to feel like you're getting momentum. So looking at what you do want out of your story, maybe not necessarily genre or book, but just what are you looking for based on what's going on in your reading slump and your life will help you choose from one set of books. Maybe you've gone through a breakup and you're I don't want any romance. I don't want to see people happy and in love. That's fine. That's great. That's going to eliminate any romance book for you and potentially even fantasy romance. So you might, by process of elimination, be left with mystery, thriller, and some literary fiction. And then you could choose from there. Or maybe you've had a loss of some kind and you're you know what? This is just too heavy. I don't want to read about any death of any kind. And so that also eliminates certain types of stories for you, which will then help narrow down what you should be reading or what would be appealing to you in this time. Kind of on the flip side, you could also lean into whatever you're experiencing. I had a family death, almost 5 years ago now. And I leaned into that. I picked up a book by Caitlin Dougherty called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which is all about death culture, death practices, and how we view death in America as this like bad, horrible thing. And then I picked up Pet Sematary. Like, definitely not the happiest, lightest of reads, but in that moment, that's what I was feeling. I was looking for answers in my grief. I did the same thing recently with something I'm going through, and I picked up a book about that topic. And so just, even if it's not, like, you're not reading at the same pace, you're still picking up books, you're still just being critical about what you do and don't want, and that, again, will just help narrow down the field. So next time you're in a slump and you're like, I don't know what to read, think about this question. Like, take some time, think about it, and see what you come up with genre or story-wise. My next tip for getting out of a reading slump would be to check out a genre you don't normally read from. If you typically read fantasy romance or contemporary romance, epic fantasy, like, at some point, the stories might stop feeling new and exciting. I have experienced this myself where, you know, I've read a certain genre for so long, and it's like, oh, they have a magical power, it's gonna save the world, or like, oh, I didn't see that coming, and you totally did. Like, there's only so many things certain genres can do, because they're almost like limited to what their genre is, if that makes sense. So if you feel slumpy because you've been reading the same type of story, grab a different genre. Or even if you're just like, I don't know, it's reading, nothing sounds good, do something different, because the right book that's just different enough for you might just spark like a whole new like reading genre for you to check out. It might really inspire you, and then you're like, oh my god, I want to read all these types of books. I've never read anything like this before. And that just reinvigorates some excitement in reading. I would caution you to still do your due diligence when picking out a book out of a new genre. So let's say you only read thrillers. That's your preferred genre, and you're like, well, I don't know. You do some thinking, you figure out what you do and don't want, and you've settled on historical fiction. You could certainly look up what the most popular historical fiction novels are, but I would still like read through a few of the synopses, make sure it still sounds interesting enough. The Nightingale comes to mind as a really popular historical fiction. That one did not work for me. And if you're looking at this book and you're like, oh, like I'm not really interested in World War II history, like, I don't know, it's not really my favorite time, maybe try a different era, or like more of a spy historical fiction because you like those thrillers. Like, see if you can find some similarities within different genres, but then also look up the books, because I have been burned time and time again picking up books based on hype without actually seeing if it's something I truly would be interested in. So make sure you do that so you don't get into a slump by trying to get out of one. My next tip for getting out of a reading slump would be to try a reread. Maybe look back at your favorite books and grab something that you've actually never reread before. I have not reread a ton of books. I've reread An Enchantment of Ravens a few times. It's a really sweet, cozy fantasy romance. I have reread a fair amount of Sanderson just to keep up on his new books. But there's other books that I would love to reread that I loved in the moment and I think would be really satisfying on reread. And the rereads I have done have still been amazing experiences. I think the first time I read Mistborn, it was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, oh my gosh, like I loved it. It was such a good time. But I re-listened to it maybe 2 years ago and I was sobbing, like sobbing at the end, because I knew it was coming. I knew it was happening. And because I knew the plot, like I knew kind of what was going on, I was able to pick up different character like motivations and their feelings. And I was like, oh my God, like, I was just like so distraught. And it was so wonderful to pick up different things on that reread. You could also, like if you're looking for a cozier book, if that's something that you're in the mood for, a lot of times like a reread is nice because you know what happens, like there's no surprises, like you know what you're getting into. Whereas sometimes you pick up a book and you're like, oh, like I didn't know this really heavy thing was in there. Like, okay, great. And now you're kind of like facing a decision of whether to continue reading something that's heavier than you intended or not. But rereading can be really fun. I mentioned An Enchantment of Ravens. I grabbed that audiobook recently because I hadn't been feeling well, so I could just lay on the couch and listen to Julia Whalen talk about Rook and Isabel, and it was just so lovely. My fourth tip, speaking of audiobooks, is to grab an audiobook, turn it on, and just do something. Just do something. Do anything. So there have been times where I'm like in between books, or maybe I'm just in between vibes. I don't really know what I want. I grab an audiobook that I know I want to read, or from a narrator I know I already like. I turn it on, and I just passively listen while I'm cleaning or doing dishes or like just teetering around the house. And then eventually, it's really cool when this happens, there's a moment where you're listening and then you're like, okay, like I'm here, I'm invested now, and now I'm like scrubbing toilets and like baseboards because I want to keep listening. Like I find myself doing extra tasks because now I'm like, I can't put this down. Like I'm invested. So when that moment happens, it's just the best. It's just the best. And I find it's really nice with audiobooks because you can kind of stay busy while you're reading a book. Like you have an amazing story to keep you company. You probably have to do dishes and clean anyways, so you might as well just turn something on and that magic moment will hit. Hopefully, I'm really hoping that it works for you, because then now you've got a book under your belt, and that momentum is sometimes just enough to have you keep going. I know audiobooks aren't for everybody, but I would encourage you to at least give it a few tries, because even just switching formats of storytelling can be helpful. I've heard, switching from Kindle to physical book or vice versa, but even just trying an audiobook, like something new, will be different enough for you. And I would give it a few tries. Make sure you listen to the samples. Make sure you like the story. Listen to the narrator's voice, because a good or bad narrator can make or break the story. And then play with your listening speed. I'm just amped up all the time, so I need to listen to my books faster in order to keep my attention. Some stories, if there's an accent, or like Robin Hobb's The Life Strip Trader trilogy, I slow down certain stories if I need to, but for the most part, I'm always playing with that speed based on the story and who's speaking. So give it a try, give it a few tries, but I'm like, oh, like when that moment hits, it's just so wonderful. And I'm just hoping it happens for you. I do have some videos about my favorite audiobooks, my favorite narrators, so I will link those down below. But again, have this, like all of these things we're talking about, have them in mind when you're thinking about an audiobook to pick up, and hopefully you grab an amazing one. My next tip would be to go book shopping or book browsing. So I just think there's something so lovely about being surrounded by books. It feels inspiring. It feels nice. It's just like, oh my God, bonus points if it's sunny out and you have a nice coffee and you're just looking at books for hours. Like, it's my absolute favorite thing in the world. Even if you only buy one book, like just being amongst the books is just so nice. I can't explain it. But like, we're all readers, so you know what I'm talking about. You know that feeling. You can do this at a new bookstore. I love a used bookstore. That's actually my preference. And it's extra fun when you find a book you've been thinking about or you've seen that's kind of new, and you find it on the shelf and you're like, yes, like I can't believe I found this. Like that's extra exciting, right? You can also do the library as well. You don't have to buy a book, but I do think there is something exciting about browsing books, seeing what's out there, looking for something new, maybe something you haven't heard of before, and just being around them. At the library, they do have fairly new releases available, or maybe a book that you've had on your list for a while that you forgot about is at the library and it catches your attention and you're like, oh yeah, like I want to read that. Let's pick it up right now. So definitely check out a bookstore, a library for some new reading inspiration. Pick up a new release, kind of whatever you want, but I do find a lot of joy and inspiration being inside those spaces. My next tip would be to try a deadline. This may or may not work for you based on what's going on. Sometimes I thrive under a deadline, and other times I'm like, I can't do this, there's too much going on, like now I'm shutting down. And it really just depends. Book deadlines you could think about would maybe be like joining a local book club, because you want to read the book, you want to show up, and so that would maybe motivate you to get a book read. And a lot of times book club books are different than what you usually read, I find. That is one way. You could also do a buddy read with a friend. You could do an online buddy read, whether Fable. Like so many YouTubers have Patreons you could join, and Discords where you could talk about it, and just being in a book community can be really exciting. The other one that worked for me recently was getting an ARC, or an advanced reader copy, of a book that hasn't come out yet from NetGalley. So in January, that was really when this all started for me. I requested The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling, and that is a medieval horror book that comes out in May. I got the ARC in February, and I was like so excited. I haven't actually had an ARC before, so I was like, okay, I know I'm not in the mood to read, but one, I'm really excited about this book, and two, I want to read it like before February's over so I can get my review up, like get my review on NetGalley, and then have this out. I didn't want to sit with this book until April or even the beginning of May and then get a review out. That's not helpful. That's not providing an accurate review or like hyping up the author or the story if you really like it. Like, that's like, I wanted it out. So that did actually motivate me to at least get that book read, which was really helpful. My last tip for helping you get out of a reading slump would be to consume exciting book content, like this video. Hopefully this is exciting for you. Wherever you find your book content, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. I personally consume YouTube primarily for anything I'm curious about, but especially book reviews and book content. I find a lot of joy watching other creators talk about their favorite book, find a new favorite read, talk about new releases. Like, their excitement is just always so exciting when they gush about a book they love that a lot of times I'm like, oh, that does sound really good. Like, I want to pick that up too. You can also do this in real life and ask your friends what they're reading, what they've loved, and just having that discussion about books and connecting over books with friends, virtual, whatever, is really exciting. And a lot of times you can feed off of their excitement. I was chatting, I think it was in December, with a friend about Afterworld by Debbie Urbinsky, and like watching her talk about that book just got me so excited to pick it up. Like, she was geeking out over it and it was the best. Like, like, we're book nerds. Like, you know that feeling when you're just like, oh my God, I just read this thing and it was crazy. And you get to share it with someone. Like, my husband a lot of times gets the rundown of a book if it's wild and he's like, okay, cool. But when you share that energy with another reader, especially someone who's maybe in a slump, that could be just enough excitement for them. So whether you're on the giving or receiving side of that book excitement, I would say just consume positive and exciting book content, and maybe you'll find your next read. That is it, you guys. Thank you so much. I hope these tips for getting out of a reading slump were helpful. If you do want specific book recommendations for a reading slump, I mean, this video is going to be up forever, like, as far as I know. So if you are in a certain mood or not in a mood, drop that in the comments below. I'll try to recommend you something. Like I said, it's really hard to do blanket recommendations because we're all so different and what's going on is different, but hopefully this helps just give you some structure to try to find your next read, get you out of that slump, and get you back on track with your reading goals and reading momentum, getting excited about reading again. Like, I feel like hobby slumps come and go, but I just think it's important to like keep on track, because you like, the worst feeling is when something just drops off completely and then it feels like you're starting over. Do you have any other tips? I would also love to know what you think about that. If something has worked or not worked for you, I would really love to have a discussion in the comments. That way anyone can find this video and get something useful out of it. Good luck on breaking your reading slump. May the odds be ever in your favor. I will see you in the next one. Bye.